Let me tell you something about rejection. Something most people don't say out loud. It's not love that breaks people, it's rejection. Love, at its worst, confuses. It complicates. But rejection? Rejection confronts you. It points at everything you hoped wasn't true about yourself and whispers, "See, I told you." No one prepares you for how deeply it cuts. Not through your heart, but through your identity. Because when someone turns away from you, it doesn't just feel like they're saying no to a connection. It feels like they're saying no to you, to the way you look, the way you sound, the way you exist. And if you've ever sat alone after someone left, even if it wasn't dramatic, even if it wasn't loud, you know the silence that follows is anything but empty. It echoes, it loops, it plays back moments and rewrites them into failure. The world tells you to toughen up, move on. But that's because most people don't understand what rejection actually does to a person. It doesn't just bruise your ego. It shatters the mirror you've been using to recognize yourself. Because for so many of us, being wanted, being chosen, feels like proof that we matter. And when that proof disappears, even for a second, we're left scrambling to answer a question we never wanted to ask. What if I'm not enough? That's why this fear goes deeper than most. It's not just about being alone. It's about being discarded and believing that maybe you deserved it. The truth is, the fear of rejection isn't just emotional. It's existential. It speaks to your place in the world, your worth, your reflection in the eyes of others. And unless we understand where that fear actually comes from, we'll keep mistaking rejection for a surface wound, when in reality, it's a fracture that runs much deeper than we realize. Before we go any further, I need you to hear this. The pain of rejection isn't weakness, it's information. And it's time we listen to what it's actually trying to tell us. Because the truth is, rejection doesn't just hurt. It reveals. It cracks open a space you've worked hard to keep sealed. And suddenly, all the doubts, insecurities, and buried parts of yourself come rushing in. It's not about what they said, it's about what you've always feared was true. And that's where Carl Jung enters this conversation. Jung wasn't just a psychiatrist. He was one of the first to truly map the human soul. He believed that inside every one of us lives a side we hide, the side we don't show the world. He called it the shadow. The shadow is everything you've pushed away because you thought it made you unlovable. Too emotional, too intense, too sensitive, too weak. So you buried it. You wore the mask. You performed the version of you you hoped others would accept. But the moment you're rejected, that mask slips. And for a split second, your shadow stares back at you. That's why rejection feels so devastating. Because it doesn't just make you feel unwanted, it makes you feel exposed. You weren't just hoping someone would love you. You were hoping they would silence that voice inside you that says, "You're not enough." And when they leave, that voice gets louder. Jung believed that what we reject in ourselves doesn't disappear. It becomes unconscious. And the unconscious isn't passive. It acts. It shows up in how we chase people who can't love us, in how we stay in places that devalue us, in how we interpret rejection as proof that we were never worth choosing in the first place. Because the deeper fear isn't that someone walked away. It's that they saw the real you, the one you try to hide and chose not to stay. And whether that's true or not doesn't matter. Your shadow believes it. And once that belief takes hold, it shapes everything. You might think you've moved on, but your shadow still remembers. It remembers how you begged for closeness. It remembers the silence that followed. And it uses every new interaction to protect you from ever feeling that again. even if that means sabotaging everything good that comes your way. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's exactly what rejection does. It brings the unconscious to the surface. It shows you the patterns. It shows you the pain you never healed. It forces you to look at the version of yourself that you thought no one could ever love. And here's the shift. Healing doesn't come from pretending it didn't matter. Healing begins the moment you acknowledge that it did. The moment you turn toward the shadow and say, "I see you. You're part of me, but you don't get to run the show anymore." Because once you stop fearing the parts of yourself that rejection exposes, you take your power back. And when that happens, rejection is no longer a verdict. It's an invitation to meet the parts of yourself that were waiting to be seen. There's a specific kind of disorientation that follows rejection, the kind that makes you question not just the relationship, but your reflection. What was once a confident sense of self now feels like scattered pieces, as if someone walked in and rearranged everything you thought you knew about who you were. In moments like this, it doesn't feel like a person walked away. It feels like a judgment has been made, and you're the defendant. Your qualities, your value, your desirability, all of it gets pulled into the spotlight. The rejection might have lasted seconds, but the trial it triggers inside you seems endless. Validation isn't something we're born needing, it's something we learn to crave. From early on, we're rewarded for being agreeable, charming, pleasing. You adapt to survive, to belong, and eventually you start relying on those external signs to answer internal questions. Am I good? Am I worthy? Am I enough? Rejection breaks that loop. It interrupts the feedback system you've depended on. One person's silence or disinterest suddenly feels louder than years of effort. You gave your best, and it wasn't wanted. That realization turns into a slow unraveling, not just of your self-esteem, but of the image you've used to hold yourself together. The mind scrambles for control. You start replaying everything. Did you overshare? Should you have waited longer to reply? Were you too eager? Too cold? Beneath every mental rewind, there's a quiet question pulsing just below the surface. What did they see that made them leave? This is what puts your identity on trial. You're no longer evaluating an interaction. You're evaluating yourself. And when the verdict feels like not enough, even if no words were spoken, it starts rewriting your sense of who you are. In response, some people go silent, others overcorrect. You might shift your behavior, tone yourself down, try to become smaller or more likable, anything to prevent it from happening again. But with every shift, you lose a little more of yourself. Eventually, you don't even know who you're protecting anymore, just that whoever you truly are must not have been safe enough to keep. What makes this more painful is that it often happens in private. People don't see the slow erosion. They see you functioning. But inside, you're building a self that's constantly trying to prove it deserves connection. This is why rejection hits where it hurts the most. Because when you've learned to measure yourself through the eyes of others, their disapproval doesn't feel like opinion. It feels like truth. You start to believe that being unwanted means being unworthy, and that belief doesn't just bruise, it brands. When your identity starts to crack under the pressure of rejection, the pain doesn't stay on the surface. It moves inward. And what you're left with is not just confusion about who you are, but grief for something you can't quite name. Jung believed there was a reason for that, something buried even deeper than the shadow. He called it the anima and animus, unconscious soul images that live inside all of us. The anima is the inner feminine in a man, the animus, the inner masculine in a woman. But beyond gender, they represent the missing parts of ourselves, the energy we search for in others, to feel complete. You don't just fall for someone because they're charming or kind. You fall because something in them reflects something forgotten in you. That reflection feels ancient, familiar, magnetic. So when they reject you, it's not just a person walking away. It's a fracture at the soul level. Somewhere in them you saw healing, not consciously, not in words, but in the way they looked at you, the way they made you feel seen. It was never about their presence. It was about what their presence activated in you. This is what Jung meant when he said we project our anima or animus onto others. We don't see them clearly. We see our own missing parts. They become the container for everything we long for: balance, wholeness, safety. And when that container breaks, it feels like death. Not of love, but of the possibility that someone could ever make you feel that whole again. There's something terrifying about being mirrored so closely and then discarded. It shakes the foundation of your psyche. It feels like you were halfway to reclaiming something sacred, and then it vanished without explanation. You try to be rational. You tell yourself they were just a person, but your nervous system disagrees. Your body mourns. Your instincts rebel, because the rejection didn't just separate you from them. It separated you from the part of yourself you thought you were finally getting back. This pain doesn't respond to logic, because it's not coming from logic. It comes from projection, from longing, from the unconscious reaching for integration. And that's what makes this experience so destabilizing. You don't know where the grief ends and the identity begins. All you know is that something was lost, and that it mattered more than you can explain. Jung didn't suggest we eliminate the anima or animus. He taught that we should reclaim them, to recognize when we've projected them onto others, and begin the work of drawing that energy back into ourselves. But most people never do. They keep searching for someone else to carry the pieces they've disowned. And every rejection reinforces the illusion that those pieces live outside of them. This is why rejection feels like death. Because in a way it is the death of an illusion, the end of a projection. And what's left is the invitation to stop looking for wholeness in someone else and begin the terrifying, necessary work of finding it within. After the rejection, something strange happens. The story doesn't end. It starts expanding. Even when the person is gone, the relationship continues to live inside your mind, rewritten over and over, until it no longer resembles what really happened. This is the beginning of the fantasy loop. You don't do it on purpose. It creeps in slowly, during quiet hours, while you're doing something ordinary. Suddenly, you're imagining what you should have said, how they might have stayed if you'd just done one thing differently. You replay the goodbye, but this time, it ends with them changing their mind. What makes the fantasy so powerful is that it gives you something the rejection stole: control. In your mind, you can fix it. You can rewrite the moment of rupture. You can undo the loss, but this imagined repair comes at a cost. Every time you revisit the fantasy, you widen the gap between what you wanted and what actually happened. Reality starts to feel like the enemy, and your own mind becomes the sanctuary you retreat to. There's comfort in obsession. It gives structure to chaos. It turns rejection into a puzzle you can solve, rather than a wound you have to feel. But this obsession doesn't bring relief. It brings repetition. The same loops, the same scenes, the same unanswered questions. The most dangerous part of the fantasy loop is that it keeps hope alive long after it should have died. Not real hope, but attachment dressed as possibility. You cling to the idea of who they could have been. You fall in love with a version of them that never existed. This imagined version becomes more vivid than the real person, more forgiving, more attuned. more capable of giving you the love you needed. And that illusion becomes harder to let go of than the actual relationship ever was. Underneath all of it is fear, not just of loss, but of finality. Because if you accept that it's over, you also have to accept that the story didn't end the way you needed it to. And that kind of closure feels like a collapse. The fantasy loop thrives on unfinished sentences. It feeds on potential, on what if, and maybe, and almost. And while it may feel like connection, what it really creates is distance from yourself, from healing, from the truth. No one tells you that moving on isn't about forgetting them. It's about breaking the loop. When the fear of rejection lingers too long, it stops feeling like fear. It becomes something harder, sharper, quieter. It becomes bitterness, not because you stopped caring, but because you cared and it didn't protect you. Carl Jung believed that when parts of us are rejected, especially in moments when we're vulnerable, the ego steps in to protect what's left. But it doesn't always do this gently. Sometimes it builds walls. Sometimes it creates an entirely different version of you, one that doesn't feel, doesn't need, doesn't risk. This version is what Jung called the persona, the mask you wear to survive in the world. It's shaped by what gets rewarded and what gets punished. And when you've been hurt too many times, your persona starts to carry bitterness as armor. You still want connection, but now it's buried under sarcasm, pride, or emotional distance. You start pretending rejection doesn't bother you. You dismiss people before they can dismiss you. You tell yourself you're better off alone, not because you believe it, but because it hurts less than hoping again. The rejected ego doesn't disappear. It compensates. It looks for ways to feel superior. You compare. You criticize. You look for flaws in the people who once made you feel invisible, not out of cruelty, but out of defense. This defense becomes seductive. Bitterness gives the illusion of strength. You feel sharp, alert, untouchable. But what it really does is keep your pain unresolved and your fear unexamined. Deep down, you're not cold. You're exhausted. You're tired of being vulnerable and getting nothing back. You're tired of being sincere in a world that often rewards indifference. Jung would say that this is the moment when the ego has taken over the self. The true self, the one capable of love, connection, humility, gets buried under the need to never be humiliated again. And in that process, you begin to reject others preemptively, so you never have to feel rejected yourself. But this strategy has a cost. It isolates you, not just from other people, but from your own capacity to feel fully alive. Bitterness is the ego's last line of defense against pain it never learned how to process. But pain ignored is not pain healed. And no amount of distance will ever replace the thing you were actually craving, to be accepted without needing to wear a mask. Not every rejection has to turn into a lesson. Sometimes it's just something that happened, and it hurt. And maybe the real maturity is in not needing to twist that pain into meaning right away. You felt something. You wanted something. It didn't go how you hoped. That's enough. You don't owe anyone a performance of detachment or growth. What matters is what you choose to carry forward, and what you choose to leave behind. You don't need to harden to move on. You don't have to become colder, sharper, or smarter to avoid being hurt again. Most of that is just fear in disguise. Fear of repeating the same wound. Choosing to stay soft after rejection isn't weakness. It's restraint. It's refusing to let one experience rewrite how you move through the world. It's easy to make yourself smaller after someone walks away. To try and be more likable, more cautious, less visible. But dignity isn't in adjusting yourself to avoid pain. It's in learning that pain doesn't get to define who you are. What happened might have shaken your confidence, but it didn't erase your value. Not being chosen doesn't mean you weren't enough. It just means the match wasn't right, for reasons that aren't always visible or even logical. Rejection can expose the rawest parts of you, but those parts aren't shameful. They're the places where care is still needed. And giving yourself that care, instead of demanding it from someone else, is a kind of repair no one else can offer you. Letting go with grace doesn't mean you're okay with what happened. It just means you've stopped waiting for an apology to feel whole again. When you dignify rejection, you stop chasing validation where it already ran dry. You begin to invest that energy in showing up for yourself, with honesty, clarity, and consistency. If this message spoke to you, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps this kind of content reach more people and keeps conversations como esa vivas. And if you'd like to support this work directly, you can tap the super thanks button. Above all, thank you for watching and staying until the end. That already shows more self-awareness than most people ever reach.